WDW Radio, your information station. WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your passport to the Disney parks. I am your host, Lou Mangello, and this is show 775. And since 2004, I've wanted to help you not only have the best possible vacation experience when you go to the parks, but I also want to bring you a little bit of Disney magic wherever you are. Here on the podcast, my weekly live video, blog, events, weekly newsletter, and more. Please join the community and find everything at WDWRadio.com. And this week, in honor of Women's History Month, we're going to be shining a light on some of the incredible women who have shaped the Disney legacy as we look at the 10 most influential women in Disney history. From the foundational influences to animation legends and modern leaders, we're going to underscore the broader impact of influential women on the company as we pay tribute to the enduring legacy of these remarkable women, and also talk about how their stories continue to inspire generations of Disney fans. I'll then have our Disney Trivia Question of the Week and more updates at the end of the show. And if you like what you hear, please share the show and tell a friend. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. In celebration of Women's History Month, I think it's important that we continue the legacy and tradition of commemorating and encouraging the observance and celebration of not just the vital role of women in American history, but in our case, celebrating the incredible women who helped shape the Disney legacy. From the pioneering animators and storytellers to the visionary leaders and Imagineers, this week, we're going to dive into the stories of the 10-ish most influential women in Disney history. And these are the trailblazers who haven't just contributed to the magic that we love today, but I think also have helped pave the way for future generations of women to dream and believe and create. And joining me this week is a woman whose own storytelling contributions on the WDW Radio blog and with me on the podcast have not only been impactful, but continue to be enjoyed by people who just found the show and the site. I want to welcome back to the show, Kendall Foreman.
Hey, thank you for that kind introduction. That means a lot. I always hope that people get a lot out of the blog posts.
I think they do, and I love having you on because I think we're both, it's very clear the extent of how far our fandom and nerddom go in terms of our love of Disney history. And I think too, specifically this week, Kendall, the people who helped shape it. And I think for a long time, a lot of these were not just faceless, but nameless people before things like social media and even D23. A lot of the work of these people, and for this week's show, specifically the women who've helped impact and influence the enduring legacy of Disney, really were not very well known.
Yeah, I think if you had asked me to contribute to this, 4 or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have struggled to come up with names, possibly of 10 names. But the other day when you mentioned that you wanted to do this, I was sitting with someone and I said, oh, Lou wants to do a podcast on the most influential women. And they kind of looked at me and they're like, well, who are you going to pick? And I just immediately rattled off like 10 names just off the top of my head that I'm not sure I could have done that years ago. And I think that's definitely a testament to D23, to the Parks blog, to a lot of the books that have come out in recent years that are available now, not just to know these women's names, but to also know their stories.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've loved about not just D23 and D23 Expo, but the Legends ceremony and Destination D23, and getting to hear from these people up on stage, especially as, some of them are getting more advanced and we start to lose these people, year over year. And in the past, I remember not too long ago, I guess back in 2020, 2021, we looked at sort of the top 10 Disney heroines. And on that list, it was interesting because there were some fictional heroines and there were some real heroines that made that list. I know for me, I wanted to focus on the real flesh and blood women on my list this week. Maybe I was actually thinking about writing. I think I need to almost write something for the blog, which I don't normally do, because the problem that I had with my list is that it wasn't just me coming up with 5, maybe 10 in case there was overlap. I wanted to list like 50, because the more that I started to think about it, not just in terms of, well, who worked for the studio, who's in the theme park, women who maybe whose names we don't hear enough because of their role was not necessarily front facing. My list ended up being much, much longer than I expected. But when I said this to you, what were sort of some of the factors that you were, actively or sort of subconsciously considering when you were putting together your list?
Yeah, I very quickly had to come up with a definition of what I thought influential meant. So what I went with was not just exceptional at their craft, but someone who did something that created such an impact within the Disney company that it was fundamentally different. Something in their field was fundamentally different because this person existed and because they did what they did. And I also tried really hard to pick someone from different areas. I do have some overlap. I do have more than one Imagineer between my long and my short list, more than one animator potentially. But I tried really hard to look at all aspects of the company when I was selecting my top choices.
Yeah, I did the same thing because I started off sort of subconsciously, and then I was sort of jotting down notes and words, right? So, the historical impact, how did something that they do impact the direction or techniques? Did they pioneer something that was new? Did they have was there any sort of maybe like cultural significance to their contributions? Whether it's, the hiring of the first woman in a certain department, diversity and representation over a period of years and decades, innovation, vision, leadership roles, as well as what the legacy and sort of the endurance of what they contributed still might be today. How did they maybe not only just break new ground, but challenges that they had, lessons that maybe people, women, young girls, anybody can sort of be influenced by what they did and how it shapes the future of Disney. So, again, I believe in ladies first, and you are my guest, and I am so very curious to hear who is going to be on your list first. And is it going to be, wow, we have a lot of ones that match, or the creativity that you came up with in putting your list together? So
I think I'm going to start out back in time to the early days of the Disney company. This woman was originally from Minnesota. She was trained at the New York Pratt Institute and later moved to Pasadena, California. She was an artist and an educator. So I'm kind of categorizing her as the educator and philanthropist on my list.
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy and I have to write down my answer to see if I'm right.
She actually never officially was employed by the Disney company, but she had a huge impact on the company. And her name is Nelbert Chenard. And if the name Chenard sounds familiar, it's because of the Chenard Art Institute in Los Angeles. And that institute was founded by Mrs. Chenard in 1921. She was a war widow. She had worked in education, in fine art education at some other institutes, but she saw a different way of doing things. She wanted to open up her own school, which at this point in time, to have a woman found an art institute is unheard of. And she starts this school, which was responsible for training so many of the Disney legends later on. Alice Davis, Mary Blair, Ollie Johnston, Frank Thomas, and others. And not only was she impactful because she started the school that trained these individuals, but in the late 20s, when Walt was wanting to transition from cartoon shorts to full-length features, he recognized that his animators were going to need some different training in order to fully capture what a human being looks like in animation versus these cartoon characters. But money was tight. And so he talked to Mrs. Chenard about this, and she really believed that Walt had something to offer to American art, to American society, and she offered to let his animators come there for free at the time. That they would pay her back later for the classes and the education that they received. Which, if you listen to some interviews with some other people who went to Chenard over the years, this was not uncommon. That she overlooked people's tuition a lot. And she continued to send people over to the studios for years after that to offer training on evenings. And she just had a very close relationship with Walt up until, later in life, she had a stroke. The Institute kind of had some hard times. And at that point, Walt came in and served as a director up until the time when then the Chenard Institute got enveloped into what became Cal Arts, which has played a huge history for many of the animators, both from Disney and Pixar.
Kendall Foreman, this is the reason why I love having you. I love that answer. And it was not even on my radar. I love how you connected the dots, and you're right. I mean, in terms of somebody who did not just impact the life of a single person or a couple of people. I mean, the ripple effect, the pebble in the water, the ripple effect of what she did and the number of people that she impacted and how that had such influence on the company as a whole is almost hard to quantify. And like you said, even sort of continuing as Cal Arts, which for years has always been a place where so many legendary Disney artists and animators and creators have attended. So, wow. Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. And just, I should have said this as a earlier on, we were first sort of setting this segment up. I think what will be fun to do is we're going to probably hit on a number of people. And I think some of them are certainly going to warrant, as we've done in the past. We've sort of looked at some Disney legends in the past. Some of these might be an introduction to somebody, and then we can go back at a later time and really sort of do a deep dive on some of these whose work sort of warrants their own segment that we've done in the past. I know I think our most recent one may have been, was it Mark Davis? I think Mark Davis was relatively recent.
We did some of his projects. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to go out of order because I want to sort of connect the dots, because when you said Cal Arts, the first thing I thought of, and then you mentioned her, was Alice Davis, who was absolutely on my list. I had a chance to interview Alice Davis back in 2010 on show 193. And she was almost like the first person that came to mind, because of not just her work in costume design. Actually, it was one of the most memorable interviews I was ever part of, because she was just such a wonderful person, so creative, the way she spoke about her husband and the ability to meet and chat with her in her own home. But, she started off, designing women's lingerie, before making her way to Disney, and then designing costumes for Small World and Pirates of the Caribbean. And it wasn't just about her costuming characters in legendary attractions, but I think her work, ended up sort of setting the stage for other people. She established costuming procedures, a manufacturing base, quality control and refurbishing techniques over at WDI, and really helped to sort of, I think, set the standards for three-dimensional characters in Disney attractions and shows. She was obviously, deservedly given the Disney Legend Award back in 2004. But I think pioneering costuming design for audio animatronics figures and that new level of realism and immersion and attention to detail and the meticulous research that she did not only set the standards, but I think, again, according to what my qualities needed to be, I think it did. She obviously has helped to inspire countless artists and designers and Imagineers with, the work that she did.
Yeah, I definitely had Alice Davis on my short list. And something else I think maybe not a lot of people know about her and her husband, Mark, was that they were very charitable. They often would help other artists where, if someone had a flat tire, they'd pay for the new tire. Or if they needed a meal, they'd have them over to their house. They had special close relationships with people like Pete Docter and Christopher Merritt, and just kind of those mentorship type relationships, familial almost in some situations. And I think that's also very influential and inspiring to other people who came along in the company.
Agree. Who's next on your list?
I'm going to go with another Chouinard student. And I kind of look at her as a Renaissance woman. She's definitely influential to me, and that would be Mary Blair. Just as an artist, her work to me is unparalleled. I love it because it's so contrary to sometimes I consider myself an amateur artist, but her work is so different from what I do and how my brain thinks. And, it takes a special person to be able to make a green sky and orange mountains, and it makes sense and it's beautiful. And I look at her work almost, her work within the animation department, especially almost the way you see the transition from Renaissance paintings and into, Impressionist or modern art, where you go from these animated features that have more of a, muted color tones and more of a realistic look to them, like Snow White and Pinocchio and even Dumbo. And then when Mary comes in with her concept art for a film like Cinderella or Peter Pan or Alice in Wonderland, and you can see situations where her concept art is almost translated one for one into scenes that ended up in those films. And just memorable moments and pieces of art you would want to hang on your wall. And I know there's quotes from several of the people that she worked with, like Mark Davis. He said she brought modern art to Walt in a way that no one else did. And I love Frank Thomas's quote where he says, Mary was the first artist I knew of to have different shades of red next to each other. You just didn't do that, but Mary made it work. And I kind of think of it too like dissonance in music. Like some people can sit down to a piano and play a strange chord and it just sounds terrible, but somehow with Mary's paintbrush and Mary's paper and Mary's tiles, it made sense, and just in a way that no one else was doing.
She was actually number one on my list. When I put pen to paper, hers was sort of just the first name that fell out. Because I think you're right. There's something special and unique about her work with that use of bold colors and the imaginative, I can't talk today. The imaginative designs. I know, we've seen people sort of compare her work in style to, like Matisse in the way she uses color and design. And the same thing, we continue to see her work, not just on things like Cinderella and Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, but I think most notably and recognizably in places like It's a Small World. But, I think, and Mary Blair definitely deserves her own segment. She will get one. Her approach to color and design, I think she helped sort of introduce modern art to Walt and the studio, and the influence that sort of overarching blanket and umbrella of introducing this style of art to the studio was absolutely impactful. She came from MGM, Metro-Goldwyn Mayer first, and then contributed to, a number of other films. She was art supervisor on The Three Caballeros and Saludos, Amigo. And you see a lot of her influence in things like that. And like we said, certainly in Alice in Wonderland as well. The Grand Canyon Concourse at Walt Disney World, the contemporary, that mural is typical on the largest scale possible, Mary Blair. But that use of color and the use of design to continue to influence, I think, contemporary design and animation continues to be felt even till today.
Yeah, and I would encourage listeners. It's not a long video, but there's a video out on YouTube that Disney Plus actually put out last year for Women's History Month that features Lorelei Beauvais, who was one of the production designers on Encanto, and she talks about Mary Blair and her concept work and the translation to animation and the impact that it had on her as an artist, and it's just a really neat feature.
I'm struggling who I want to mention next, because I'm like, well, do I save her till the very end because of how significant? But am I also afraid that Kendall is going to steal her first? I'm going to go with the latter. And I have to include Lillian Disney on this list. As Walt's wife, she played a crucial role, not just in the early days of Walt and the Disney company in terms of guidance and support, but even after his passing and her philanthropic efforts as well. We know the story. We've heard the story about her being credited with naming Mickey Mouse, but I think it's the conversations that we don't know about, that we sort of just hearsay stories of her role in supporting Walt in his dreams and project, and sort of being the quote unquote, the only person, who could say no to Walt Disney, and helping to sort of be that balance of some of his ideas that might have seemed more daring or almost more fanciful. And also, I'm sure she was the person that at the end of the day, Walt would come home to and be the sounding board for, and probably had far more influence that we might be privy to know because of those, behind closed door conversations between the two of them. I mentioned just briefly her continuing contributions to art and education, the $50 million donation to build the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles just shows that ongoing testament to her commitment, I think, to the arts and the community. And you mentioned Cal Arts before too. She continues to support Cal Arts, and I think Walt's vision for an institution that can help support and nurture future generations of artists. So yeah, Lillian Disney might not necessarily have her name on the end credits or the title credits of any production or any attraction, but I think a lot of what we see and enjoy and experience today would not have happened without Lillian Disney being Walt's wife.
Yeah, I mean, she was definitely on my longer list, and I did not know that she was an ink and paint girl for the studio before she and Walt got married. And also, you just have to give her credit for donating that petrified tree to Disneyland. But yeah, and most certainly, she most definitely, I mean, as a wife of someone like Walt, she certainly had to have patience. I'm sure she had to have, a childlike level of encouragement in some ways. I mean, how many of us as wives would willingly let our husbands build, model ride-on trains around our houses? But I mean, it's clear to see she must have been encouraging Walt in what he was doing, and also being a stabilizing force.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody's going, I can't hang my lightsaber over the fireplace, but she allowed him to build a full scale train in the backyard. And there was two bits of trivia that one that I had known, and one that I didn't realize I think we've talked about her, especially. I think we mentioned her when we talked about the heroines, the top 10 heroines. But I thought it was fascinating that she grew up on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation, where her father was a blacksmith and a federal marshal. And what I didn't know was that after Walt's death in 1966, she remarried John L. Trians, a real estate developer, in 1969 until he passed in 1981.
I did not know either of those.
All right. So who is next on your list?
I'm going to go with someone who is still currently employed with the Disney company, who I believe has definitely had an impact over the last, 14 years in the role that she's been in. And I believe she has the opportunity to be equally as impactful, if not more, going forward in the future. And that is Becky Cline. Rebecca Cline as the director of the archives. And obviously the archives was founded by Dave Smith. But Becky started working there prior to his retirement. She originally had pursued technical theater in college and didn't have a job right away. So she started working in the rare books department of the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, which I think is fascinating and most certainly had to help prepare her for what her job was going to be. And then when Dave Smith retired, she became the director, which the archives not only is a museum of props and books and documents and artwork and merchandise and choosing what to collect and how to store and everything. And I'm very jealous of you that you've been able to visit the archives. But it also serves as a repository of information for everyone from the company. I know you just had Stephen Vagnini on, and he talked about Imagineers coming there and being able to research the stories. What are canon stories for these attractions, for these locations within our parks? And Becky, as the head of the director, is helping to foster that history going forward. And that has an impact of what we as fans think about the company and the way that the company moves forward based on its history. And I love that she serves as the director of that tie between the past and the present and the future.
First of all, I love this entry, and I'm embarrassed that I did not think about Becky Cline, especially just having Steven on a few weeks ago on the show. And I've known Becky for ages, and I've seen her present at the archives, at the studios, at D23, and she's an amazing person. And I can't believe I didn't think to put her on this list, which she absolutely deserves to be on. And I think as time goes on, and as podcasters decades from now look back and do a list similar to this, Becky Cline will absolutely be deservedly on that list.
Yeah. And I love too that she's not just, a woman in an office. She's very forward facing for the company, that she does seminars and talks. And I loved the Armchair Archivist series that they did on YouTube, that D23 did on YouTube back probably a decade ago at this point, but she's featured in several episodes of that. She's on the Adventure Through the Walt Disney Archives documentary on Disney Plus. So it's very neat to be able to see something like that and hear from her firsthand of the job that she's doing.
That's awesome. God, I don't know where to go, because every woman deserves to be on this list and every woman deserves to be quote unquote next. But again, we're not going in any sort of specific order. All right. Since you're going with someone who is currently employed, I will follow suit. And somebody whose work we have enjoyed, somebody whose name and face we have seen a number of times on places like Disney Plus, on stages at D23, on Disney Parks YouTube channel. And we're about to enjoy, I think, some of her most impactful work with the opening of a new attraction coming this summer to Walt Disney World. I am, of course, talking about Sharita Carter. And she's a fascinating individual who has served a number of roles over at Walt Disney Imagineering. I think she's currently an executive producer focusing on creating experiences for the Disney parks. I believe she may be the first African-American woman who is an executive producer at Imagineering. She's the lead on the development of Tiana's Bayou Adventure. I had a chance to meet and spend some time chatting with her, unintentionally, to say, quote unquote, down in New Orleans, and the passion that you can see that she has for these projects. And she came from an accounting background. I tell my kids who are in college right now that you don't know, what you choose right now might not necessarily be the path that you end up. So she starts in accounting and finance and moves from, somebody who's about the numbers to a creative role. Really, I think showcases her versatile skill set and the ability to not just adapt, but really thrive in different roles in the company. She's also worked on Runaway Railway. Wow, I really can't talk today. Runaway Railway. And she's also, too, she's been a very prominent advocate for diversity and inclusion within storytelling and experiences, and helped sort of create some of these initiatives to not just represent, but celebrate a lot of diverse voices and perspectives. So I think she not only serves as a brilliant creative force, but I think that an inspiration to a lot of people, not just from her own personal journey, but I think the importance of some of these things like representation and perseverance and bringing some of these stories to life in the parks and the attractions.
Yeah, I love watching videos with Sharita Carter. She has such a joy for what she's doing and a desire for authenticity, and I am definitely looking forward to Tiana's Bayou Adventure.
Is it just for the beignets, or are you actually looking forward to them?
Oh, I mean, there better be beignets, because they tell us we're going to be able to smell them on the attraction. So if there is not a place for me to purchase those, I'm going to be very upset.
The best Smellitzer scent that they can come up with might be beignets in the attraction. So,
for my next choice, if you're ready to go on to the next one,
yep,
I'm going to go with a technician. We hear a lot about girls and science and STEAM and STEM, and how do you get girls interested in science? And I think this woman definitely had an influence in that area, and her name is Ruthie Thompson, and that might not be a name that a lot of people recognize. She is a Disney legend. Her family moved to California when she was little, and she grew up right down the street from the Disney Brothers studio. She used to play out in the street with her friends, and Walt and Roy would go out and film them to kind of get, movement of kids to use as an example for some of the artwork in the Alice comedies, which I just find that fascinating, that she was kind of working for the Disney company as a child,
Probably didn't even realize it. She was there, right?
Yeah, and she would walk down the street. She talks about peeking into the window and watching the girls in the ink and paint department and just being fascinated by what they were doing. And as she got older, she had the opportunity to then work at the Disney Brothers studios. She advanced into being a part of the animation checking and scene planning, then advanced into being supervisor of the scene planning department. And it was there where she really understood the movement of the camera. And Floyd Norman actually has a quote where he says, "Ruthie was our computer before computers were invented." She understood the mechanics and the mathematics of it and how to guide the camera for the movement in those animated films. And she ended up working in some capacity on every film between Snow White and The Rescuers. And she actually was one of the first women to be admitted into the Hollywood Camera Union. And she lived to the age of 111 and passed away in 2021, which at the time when she was still alive, she was the only living person who had known Walt in those very early days of the studio. And in the Ink and Paint, The Women of Walt Disney Animation, there's a quote in there that says, "Ruthie was a living witness and a vital contributor to the progress and growth of the animation industry as we know it today." And I might have seen Ruthie Thompson's name in a credit on one of these films, but I did not know her story prior to researching this for you. So hearing that quote and what an impact she had, I love that I found her name and got to learn a little bit about her.
I love it. And exactly what I wanted in part this segment to do is bring to light some of the names that maybe we don't know, right? Maybe we don't hear, that maybe don't have giant murals in the contemporary, or whose name we see on end credits of a film. In keeping with that same philosophy, I'm going to read you a quote from something that you could find in Walt Disney World on a window. And it says, "The future is in your palm. The great astral Marge sees all." That is a window. Do you know where you can find that?
I don't. I'm going to guess. No, I don't know.
So in Disney's Hollywood Studios,
okay,
over Keystone Clothiers. So if you look at Keystone Clothiers on sort of the backside of Keystone Clothiers, on sort of the Mesoamerican revival side of that sort of faces, Min and Bills, there's a window that says, "The future is your palm. The great astral Marge sees all." I believe, and as do others, that is a reference to Marge Champion. Again, somebody whose name you might not know or recognize, but you have in a derivative way seen her in an animated film, because she was a prominent dancer and actress and student of ballet, but she served as the live action model for Snow White. And her movements and her dancing was studied by the animators to create more lifelike animations than had been seen previously in the short form films that Disney was putting out. So her work in not just in Snow White, but working on other films as well. She also modeled the Blue Fairy in Pinocchio and Hyacinth Hippo in Fantasia. And this is when she's, 14 years old. I think I started to sort of think long term. I think what she did, right, sort of being the first to do this, literally helped revolutionize animation, right? Because she makes these characters more realistic, more expressive. And I think, through an iterative process, we see now it's a completely different world with things like motion capture and AI and things like that. But she has this long career in film and television and Broadway. But I think her work is sort of foundational as that live action model to create for the Disney animators more lifelike, more believable animations, which sets a new standard, I think, for character animation that continues to influence Disney films, because she brought that grace of a dancer and a new sense of expressiveness to the Disney characters, which helped in turn Disney achieve, I think, new heights of realism and what they were able to do in hand-drawn 2-dimensional figures in animated feature films.
Definitely. And you have women like Margaret Carey and Helene Stanley who did similar things in subsequent Disney films. And absolutely having those life models makes a difference. Being able to see the way that fabric moves on a human body, the way that their face looks when they react to something is hugely important for an artist. And with that in mind, I'm going to use that to transition to my next choice. This woman actually had a parrot or a bird. I don't know if it was specifically a parrot, but she had a bird that she used as a life model. The bird's name was Joker, and Walt gave it to her. And this was Harriet Burns, the first lady of Imagineering. And she had this bird, just to kind of finish out that bit of trivia, but she had this bird because she was charged with designing and feathering all of the birds for the Enchanted Tiki Room. And I think it's really interesting because I think back to the first time that my family watched the Enchanted Tiki Room in Florida. And I remember my mom mentioning, did you notice that those birds were breathing? Like that their chests moved. And this was something that directly came about because of Harriet Burns. She was charged with making these birds look lifelike, and you can read the story of how she was watching Walt's elbow in a sweater one day in a meeting, and the way that it moved on the fabric, and this gave her the idea for creating this woven fabric to use for those chests of the audio animatronic birds so that they could move and take in air whenever they were supposed to sing and make them look more lifelike. And Harriet was, I think she's just fascinating because she was the first woman in a man's world as far as Imagineering was concerned. And you'll hear Alice Davis and others talk about how she showed up to work in her dresses and her high heels. And there she is with, the power saw and the tools and everything in the model shop with the guys. And that she, at the end of the day, she still looked perfect. She designed the clubhouse for the Mickey Mouse the Mickey Mouse Club TV show, the original clubhouse that they had. She designed and built that. She worked on, Storybook Land canal boats, one of my personal favorites, Sleeping Beauty Castle, New Orleans Square, the Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, the list just goes on and on of these attractions that she had her hand in and had an impact on.
I love this inclusion. I really, really love your list, and I love the fact that you have her and you sort of placed her here because she did, her work was not just about the attraction, right? Working on these individual attractions in Disneyland and working closely with Walt and the techniques. There was a lot of innovation that she brought to the table and to WED and Imagineering in terms of model making and design. And she was also, she was not somebody who just worked in a single medium. She worked in woods and plastics and fabrics and things like that. So she was able to bring these stories to life. But I think what she also represents, Kendall, too, is representation itself, right? You talked about sort of being the first woman in a man's world. Walt was somebody who was forward thinking in terms of, yes, for a long period of time, women were primarily in the ink and paint department, but allowing and inviting them and bringing them and having them be a part of Imagineering and the theme park design. Harriet Burns was one of, if not the first, to break through that barrier. And I think continue to allow for opportunities, not just for women, going forward. So, that's a great addition to the list too.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that. I think there are a lot of cases where even today there are some situations where women have to be absolutely exceptional in order to be offered a seat at the table. And even sometimes when they're exceptional, they're not. And I think within the Walt Disney Company, and was it perfect back then? No. But when there was someone exceptional at their job, be that Harriet Burns or Mary Blair or, Alice Davis or I won't take any other names in case they're on your list. But he recognized that exceptionality and gave them a place.
As I was thinking about putting together my list, it was very easy for me, and I'm sure you, to find a lot of these women, especially in Imagineering, right? Because I come sort of from a theme park mindset first, but I also tried to think on a broader scale, and I looked at the company as a whole. And one thing that's always been fascinating about the Disney Company is when you think of the Disney Company and you try and put a name or a face to it, it's obviously Walt. For a number of years in the 80s and 90s, Michael Eisner was the face of the company. Is Bob Iger the face of the company now? Maybe. But there was a time during the 50s and 60s when a woman was not just the face, but I think really almost the symbol of the company itself. She was a person who helped the company and Disney transition into television because of her influential work on things like the Mickey Mouse Club. And I'm talking, of course, about the one, the only Annette Funicello. She was, without question, far and away the most popular of all of the Mouseketeers. Supposedly she was getting her alone was getting 6,000 letters per month. She was relatable. She was friendly. She was adorable. There was this wonderful sort of shyness, but approachability to her. After the Mickey Mouse Club is over, she's in Zorro and the Shaggy Dog and Babes in Toyland and the Monkey's Uncle. And she recorded Tall Paul and Pineapple Princess. She went on to movies in the 60s, all the beach party films in the 60s that were such a huge commercial success, and became a legend in 1992. Annette's Diner in Disneyland Paris is named in her honor. I think sort of putting, front and center her enduring legacy in history as well as in pop culture. But she really helped sort of lay the foundation of the Mickey Mouse Club as an original Mouseketeer, which that show itself is an important part of Disney's television legacy. She transitions to become a true teen idol. And I think Annette represented everything that Disney did, right? She was sort of the embodiment of Disney values, that wholesome, family friendly value that Disney had, which I think why her popularity endured for so long with so many people in an audience of Disney fan. And even later in life, she had a very public battle with MS that demonstrated her strength and resilience. And I think brought, her work with her Fund for Neurological Diseases showcased not just her own struggle, but the struggles of others as well. And I think even beyond Disney, she was a cultural icon, not just for the company, but I think for the 50s and 60s, that post-war innocence and optimism really is sort of, wrapped up in a wonderfully cute little bow that was Annette Funicello.
Yeah, Annette Funicello made my extended list for sure. And I agree with you. She's iconic for the Disney company at that point in time. And, you want to talk about, the word influential and what that means. She brought people into the Disney company because there was such a fandom surrounding her.
How many more people do you have on? I mean, I have about 60 more people on my list, but for the purposes of this segment, how many more do you have on your main list?
Well, I mean, that I did I told you beforehand that I wasn't sure who my 5 were going to be. So those are my 5 that I went with. But I actually have probably, I don't know, how long do you want to be here? I could probably give you decent information on 4 more, but I can cut it down if you don't want that many.
All right, why don't we do this? Why don't we give me like 1 or 2 sentences on 3 more significant women in Disney history? Okay.
First up, I'm going to pick one that I had her on the list, and I think she's a little bit controversial. Some people viewed her as a villain. Some people view her as a hero, depending on your position within the company.
I think I know where you're going.
And that's Xenia Muka.
Oh, no, I don't.
She was born and raised in Poland, grew up till the age of 9 in a home with no plumbing. Her family moved to New York. She worked her way, worked at Gimbel's, worked her way up through politics as a communications director, and eventually, come to present day, she became the executive vice president and chief communications officer for the Walt Disney Company. And some people consider her a villain because she very vehemently protected the image of the company, but that is immensely important to the company. When a crisis happens, she was, as Bob Iger said about her, she's unrivaled in times of crisis. So very, very influential and important for the Walt Disney Company. Another person I want to mention is Jennifer Lee. She's the current chief creative officer of Disney Animation. She was the writer and co-director of Frozen, which became the highest grossing film of all time. Writer, co-director of Frozen 2. Continues to have executive producing credits on subsequent films from the Disney Company. Is just shepherding that whole portion, the animation studio. And I would suggest, listeners, if you have not, go watch Into the Unknown, Making of Frozen 2 on Disney Plus. It is a fantastic docuseries. It will give you, if you don't have an appreciation for Frozen 2, it will give you one. If you already had one, it will give you more of an appreciation for that film. And then the last person I want to end up with is Peggy Ferris. She had a 50-year career with the Walt Disney Company. She started out as a guide on the Storybook Land canal boats in Disneyland, and ended up working the conferences for Walt Disney World. So when Disney held conferences for politicians and business people and things before the opening of Walt Disney World, she worked the conferences there. And because of that, then she was parlayed into some other jobs within Imagineering. Marty Sklar asked her to work the Epcot conferences, which I just think are a fascinating topic in Disney history. And from there, she did helped with the development of World Showcase, the development of Spaceship Earth. If you ever want to know why Walter Cronkite was chosen as the voice there, she has a story on that. And eventually worked in corporate sponsorship, which is massively important to the parks. And working, she talks about working with those companies on, what products are we going to feature in our park? How are we going to feature them? How can we best feature your logo or, within our park and still maintain the thematic quality of these parks? Just a really interesting and long history. Again, working in a way that in the 70s was still considered a men's world, working with these corporations and sponsorships and things like that. And so I encourage listeners to go look up more about Peggy Ferris.
That's great. When you said before somebody who, you weren't sure if they were appreciated or vilified, I'm like, is she going to say Kathleen Kennedy? So I wasn't sure where you were going. I have a number of other people on the list that I think are deservedly on it. And that's why I think I need to do sort of a blog post and sort of name a lot of these people just to sort of give them recognition that they deserve. So I tried to think, who is somebody like a Sharita, who is a more modern. It's very easy for us to look back because the impact and the legacy for some of the women from, the 30s, 40s, 50s is a lot clearer. What's the long-term impact of some of these newer influential women is yet to be seen and determined, right? So I thought of somebody like Meg Crofton, who was a leader at Disney whose strategic vision, I think, is felt now and will continue to be felt for a while. She played, I think a very important role in enhancing the overall guest experience. And I think the operational excellence under her while she was president of Walt Disney Parks and Resorts really was sort of stepped up a lot. I think she helped to oversee a period of significant expansion and innovation, including the launch of My Magic Plus, using this technology in its infancy to help continue, I think, to revolutionize the overall guest experience by simplifying things like reservations and payment processing. And I think the personalization of the experience is going to continue to go on. How much is going to be connected to Meg in the future? It has yet to be seen. Retta Scott was on my list. I went back and forth on this next one, and I shouldn't, because how do we talk about influential women and not mention Julie Andrews? I know it's a singular role that, yes, she won an Academy Award for, and she sort of got those public accolades for, but I think her role in this character, right? We know the story of bringing this story to life and eventually getting the rights and the ability to make the movie. But her portrayal of this character that has really become synonymous with Disney magic and imagination and an incredible showcase of her exceptional talents. I think because Mary Poppins is more than, I think, quote unquote, just a film. I think it's a cultural milestone that contributed in a very significant way, both artistically as well as financially, to Disney's legacy in film, and the raising of the bar in terms of the standard in producing very high quality, very family friendly entertainment that continues to transcend generations. And I think the role that she played, right, in terms of being pioneering this female role model that is independent and intelligent and compassionate and strong and smart and nurturing and all these things rolled up in this practically perfect package. It's why the film continues to be celebrated. It has, I think, timeless appeal. And I think it's due in large part to the woman that brought this character to life on screen. And I think just even today, when we continue to see Julie Andrews, she continues to embody that spirit of Disney, and is almost, like Annette to a certain degree. You can sort of connect her as sort of being like the face of the company because of the character that she portrayed. And again, having only a very brief time to chat with her and interview her many years ago, which was a highlight of everything I've been able to do and sort of my quote unquote, the Disney side of what I do. She is as wonderful and warm and graceful. Like, she's as Mary Poppins off camera as she is on. And they say never meet your heroes. And Julie Andrews was one that I'm happy I had a chance to talk to, because she is as wonderful as you hope that she would be, outside of the costume of Mary Poppins. So I had to put her on my list.
Yeah, I debated hard on Julie Andrews. And now that we're sitting here talking, okay, I have to mention one more person. Because I just took my first trip to Disneyland in the past year. And the thing that I fell in love with at Disneyland is I felt like I was back in 1955. I sat on the Casey Jr. Circus train, and I just thought I was going to look off and see women in their A-line skirts. And, it's so, I hate to use this word, but it's so magical. And I think we owe a lot of that to Kim Irvine. She's, second generation. She's the daughter of Leota Toombs. Another woman that's worth mentioning on this list, but she has such a drive to maintain the history of that park. And even when she is directed or urged to change things within it, she does it, she's shepherded Imagineers in a way that maintains that same feeling. And my Disneyland loving heart wanted to put Kim higher on my list, so she didn't make it in my top 5, but I had to get her on here.
That's what's hard about a list like this, is invariably we're going to leave people off. It's why I'm not kidding. I had, a few dozen women on my list, and I could make arguments to include any and all of them on it. Because I think that there's a lot more to this, especially when we talk about some of the women that were coming up in the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s and 70s, and the personal challenges and obstacles that these influential women must have faced during their careers, and how they overcame them to leave a lasting impact, not just on Disney, but the entertainment industry and the women that follow them, right? How they have in knowing or unknowing ways mentored and almost inspired this next generation of female leaders and creatives and storytellers and innovators, not just within Disney, but I think within the broader entertainment industry. And I try and think ahead, how is and how can the Disney company continue to build on the legacy of these influential women? What lessons can current and future Disney cast members and creatives learn from the careers and contributions of these women? And then, how does the influence continue to shape the future of Disney in terms of storytelling and diversity and representation and opportunity? that's why I think it's so important to bring not just these 10, 12, I don't know how many names we ended up mentioning, but all of these stories, because the hope is that not just that someone will find inspiration from it, but I think we on a grand scale have to just appreciate their contributions and their work. And yes, take some lessons and inspiration from them as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you look back at the Disney Legends list, and it is predominantly men on that list. And I don't judge them for that, because it's a fact of history that for decades, when you have a company that's 100 years old, the majority of its history existed in a time when there were less women working in these fields. But we are seeing more and more women in Imagineering, more and more women in leadership roles. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we're going to see, more inspirational stories as these years go by. And hopefully decades from now, when someone looks back at this, there'll be more women on that Legends list. There'll be more stories to be told.
Yes. And I know as we start to wrap this up that you who may be listening are saying, how in the world did the two of you possibly leave this person off your list? You're 1,000% right, but I absolutely want to hear from you. I want you to champion the cause of who we were not able to put on this list. And I will try and put in a blog post over at WDWRadio.com. Please let us know what you think about our list. Who else you think should be included on it? You can let me know. I'll post this question over in the clubhouse over at WDWRadio.com/clubhouse. You can also call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1. Make your case and I will play it on the air. Also be sure to go to WDWRadio.com and look up Kendall Foreman and her, again, the legacy of years and years of so many incredible articles and contributions that you have given to the site and to the show as well. I appreciate you taking the time and your insight in helping to put this list together.
Absolutely. It's always a good time coming on the show with you.
And I know we have a lot of other things that we want to get to and cover in the future, and maybe do a little bit of deeper dive on some of these women as well. Because there's also the fictional characters and sort of the influential. I almost dropped a couple of fictional characters on here, but I didn't want to take away from the actual contributions of the real world women who have done so much.
Yeah, I mean,
favorite Disney female character to go. Female Disney female character.
Favorite female. Well, growing up, it was Ariel for sure. I mean, I'm a 90s girl, so she was my favorite then, but wow, today, I don't know. Maybe, I hate to be this person, but maybe Elsa, just because of some personal associations with Elsa and what the complexity of that character. I really appreciate that story.
Mary Poppins is on my list. Tiana is very high on my list. The entrepreneurship in Tiana, that drive and the ambition and like the redefining of the whole princess narrative, like through hard work is amazing. This might have to be a second. The Disney characters that we find inspiring as well. I know we cover a lot of them on the heroines too. So this was great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Get ready to test your Disney knowledge and see how well you know your Disney history details, or how well you can identify a quote or song from the parks with our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week. If you think you know the answer, you can enter for a chance to win a Disney prize package. And this week's trivia contest is once again brought to you by you. Because when you join the WDW Radio Nation, you are an important part of every episode of the show, the live video and community. And for as little as $1 per month, not only do you help support the show, but you also unlock exclusive rewards like monthly scavenger hunts, group video calls, private community access, and monthly care packages from the parks. Plus, your contribution helps our Dream Team project, which sends children with life-threatening illnesses to Walt Disney World through the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America. And thanks to your incredible generosity, we've raised more than $550,000 to date. I want to thank some new and longtime members of the Nation family, including Christina Welch, Deb, Christine Mahin, and Michelle Carter. If you want to find out how you can help the show, please visit wdwradio.com/support. Now, before we get to this week's question, let's go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week, and this week, probably next week, I've been loving this year's Epcot International Flower and Garden Festival, and Groot is a fantastic, new, and yes, musical topiary at this year's festival, and he's holding up a cassette tape like he's John Cusack at the end of Say Anything. And your question last week was to tell me, what did he title his special mega mix? What did he title the cassette tape that he made as part of his topiary at this year's festival? And the answer is, of course, the Greenhouse Mix, Volume 1. Greenhouse Mix, Volume 1. Anyway, I took all the correct entries, randomly selected one, and last week you were playing for a WDW Radio 3D keychain, stickers, pin, and a mystery item from the festival. And last week's winner, randomly selected, is Jennifer Miles. So Jennifer, congratulations. I'll get your prize package out to you right away. And if you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So in sticking with our topic of this week's show in terms of important and influential women in Disney history, this week's question is simple. Tell me, who was the very first female Disney Imagineer? Who was the first woman ever hired by Walt Disney Imagineering in a creative capacity? You have until Sunday, March 24th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern to go to WDWRadio.com. Click on this week's podcast. Again, you're going to play for the keychain, the stickers, the pin, and a mystery item. So good luck and have fun. That's going to do it for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed our look at just some of the amazing, influential women from Disney history. And I'd love to know from you, who's a woman in Disney history that's inspired or influenced you, and why? I'm going to post this question over in the Clubhouse at wdwradio.com/clubhouse, where I invite you to be part of the community and conversation. You can also call the voicemail at 407-900-9391 with the answer to that question, or just a hello from the parks question or comment about this or any episode. Connect with me on social. I am at Lou Mongello on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Please like the WDW Radio page on Facebook at facebook.com/WDW Radio. And please subscribe and turn on notifications. Click the bell. Click on all notifications on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/WDW Radio. And stay tuned for our next WDW Radio Live this Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Please be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at WDWRadio.com. And when you do, you can get a free copy of my 102 Things to Do in Walt Disney World at least once book. And check out our events page for our next Meet of the Month in Walt Disney World, our next Meet of the Month on the road in London in May, our upcoming cruises this October and next February on the Disney Magic to Lighthouse Point, and in February on the Disney Treasure. And don't forget to join our interest list for our WDW Radio Group Adventures by Disney to Japan in 2025. Again, you'll find links to all of these at WDWRadio.com. And when you're planning your next vacation to Disney or any destination, please visit my friends over at mousefantravel.com. They've been my partners. They've been who I recommend because it's who I trust and who I've used for more than 17 years for their fee-free travel services. More importantly, the incredible level of personal attention and service that every one of their travel advisors gives to every one of their clients. Visit them over at mousefantravel.com and tell them Lou sent you. And visit LouMongello.com. There you can find out where I serve as a keynote speaker, sharing lessons learned from the Disney parks on customer service and experience, as well as personal mentorship and guiding with coaching and events, including my weekend workshop in September. And I have one spot left for my weekend retreat in Orlando coming up next month. And as always, my friend, and you are my friend, whether you have met yet or not, all I ask is if you like the show, please help spread the word. Share a link to this or your favorite episode on social. Tag and invite a friend to listen and subscribe. And if you can, take just a couple of seconds to rate and review the show over on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify. And please always remember to choose the good, because if you spread positivity, positivity will spread. I love you. I appreciate you. I hope you have an amazing day and even better tomorrow. So until next time, see ya.